Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this Financial Management in Focus session. It's really lovely to have you all here for what's going to be a jam-packed, informative session. And if you haven't already, please do introduce yourself in the chat so we know who you are and where you're joining us from. Now, I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Kritika Adati, and I'm joining you all from a very sunny morning in London. I currently work as a digital education delivery lead, and I'm part of the team at ACCA that's dedicated to ensuring that we support you as best as we can with your exam success. Now, today's session is all about managing your approach to master your exam strategy. And we're hoping that after attending this session, you'll feel better prepared for your upcoming exam. Now, I'm really hoping you do have your notepads at the ready so that you can jot down all the useful tips and guidance that's going to be shared with you through this webinar. Now, your expert tutor today is Z Kang Chan. Z is exceptionally knowledgeable, and he's going to be showcasing to you how you should be presenting your exam answers to maximize marks in the exam. He's also going to be sharing some insights on common student challenges, along with his tips and techniques that's going to support your exam success. Now, before I hand over to Z, I'm just going to cover some housekeeping points very briefly. And whilst I do this, I'm going to be spotlighting some icons, and you'll see them flash at your side. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there are a lot of buttons. And if we start firstly with the help icon, which you should see flashing now, this provides the resources and information that's going to help you resolve any technical glitches that you might experience. Now, there are also icons for the slides and the media player, which should also be flashing at your side. You do need to have both of these open during the webinar, but you can resize them, and that will be to your preference to fit your window and your screen. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll notice there is an attendee group chat, so you can use this to have conversations with fellow colleagues on this webinar, or fellow attendees rather, on this webinar. Now, we do encourage that if you have questions that you want to ask Z or members of the ACCA team that are supporting behind the scene, that you actually use the Q&A button. And I'll just flash this as well, so you should see that your side. Please avoid adding personal details in the chat because that'll be visible to everyone, okay? There's a resource list as well. I'm just going to center that. Now, this resource list is an icon that looks like a file symbol. If you click on this, you'll be able to access all the resources relevant for today's webinar. And we strongly encourage that you do take a moment to check these out and explore these in your own time. Now, I mentioned the Q&A button already. Do use this to submit any questions that you'd like to ask Z or members that are supporting this webinar behind the scene. Like I say, the team are really dedicated to helping and supporting you through this webinar. We'll try and answer as many of those questions as possible, but just because of the volume of questions that we receive, we might not get around to all of them. But that said, there is a live Q&A segment, okay, towards the end of this session, and we're going to try and answer questions that will hopefully be beneficial to all of you. Now, if at any point you can't hear or see what's happening in this webinar, please just refresh your browser because that often does do the trick. Registering for this webinar means that you are going to be sent an email tomorrow with details on how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or if you have a technical issue, because you are going to be able to replay and watch this on demand. Okay. Now, we do have a reactions button as well. So if at any point you're really feeling what Z is saying and imparting, please do show those reactions, because we do love to know when you are benefiting from relevant segments through this webinar as well. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Z, who will be taking you through the webinar, but I will be back towards the end of the session to wrap up. So over to you, Z.
Thank you very much, Kritika. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all from all over the places that we can see from the chat. It is wonderful to see everyone over here virtually. And thank you to ACCA for having me here. by delivering the InFocus webinars for financial management for June 2025 examination regarding managing your approach and master your exam strategy. Now, first of all, my name is Zikang Chan, or you may just address me as TK. I'm a fellow member of ACCA and a member of ICAW. FM is one of the subjects that I love teaching over the last more than 20 over years in several parts of the world. Now, in this session, I would like to take you through, starting by showing you and sharing with you the way to present our answers in exam effectively, particularly on the section C, the constructive response questions over there. At the same time, I would also like to draw to your attention what are the common challenges experienced and faced by students. What are the root causes that give rise to these challenges? More importantly, the way that we deal with these challenges, do we have a solutions for it? And with all these discussions, I will show you from some of the questions that we gathered from the previous sessions, some of the questions that many students would have asked to ACCA. I'm quite sure these are the questions that it probably will also keep in your mind for quite some time. And before you raise it up and put it in the Q&A, perhaps allow me to share with you some of the questions that whether it really strikes through your mind. In addition to some of these frequently asked questions that I'm going to share with you in a moment, do feel free to drop in any questions that you have in mind in the Q&A box. I will try my very best to address as many as I could within the limited time that we have today. Now, first and foremost, as mentioned, let's take through some of the key advices about the way that we can ensure our answer were presented effectively to impress the marking team, particularly on section C. Now, knowing that there are two 20 marks questions in the section C in every exam sitting, every single of these questions comprise of approximately half the marks is on narrative nature of the task. The other half the mark is on computational type of the task in nature. In other words, the theory and the calculations are always there in each of these section C questions. To me, as a tutor, I always advise the students, if you would like to have a great way, an effective way to present your answer effectively, we should ask ourselves perhaps, what is the effective way to approach the questions? If we fail to approach the questions effectively at the beginning, we already fail to present our answer effectively at the end. So what do I mean by approaching the questions effectively at the first place? Now, if you take a look at these three red boxes in the arrow sign, starting from the left, to me, I think the very first thing to ensure an effective way to approach an exam questions is to understand what were the tasks given by the examining team. It is something like whenever we are communicating with people, in order to deliver, in order to give the answer that the audience would like to hear from us. Don't you think so? The first thing is to listen to what the audience is asking. So same note apply in exam. We have to first listen and understand clearly what examining team are up to by identifying. To me, identifying is not that challenging as comparing to understand the meaning of the task that found in the requirements. I suppose by now, students should be able to pick up tasks which indicated by the verb such as calculate, estimate, discuss, explain, so on and so forth. But to understand, what do we mean whenever the question asks to estimate? Comparing to whenever the question asks to calculate, is there a difference? Well, the answer is yes, there is a difference. When the question is asked to calculate, the data could either be actual or it could be an estimate. However, if the task starts with the verb estimate, rest assured, the data given in the questions are virtually all estimated. And as such, the need to apply assumption, the needs to challenge and observe, is there any uncertainty lies on the data, will be much more likely to be relevant in the questions with the word estimate. So that is exactly what I meant by understanding the differences between the tasks, indicating by different verbs. After that, the next things that students will need to spend time to understand is the scenario, the storyline that always found on the left-hand side of the screen in every constructive response questions. So not only read the scenario, but what is more challenging and important for the students is to understand, diagnose what's behind the scene. Whenever the questions start telling you a lot of story background about a company, the nature of business, the issue the business is experiencing, or some of the data that the market is having, you have to start asking yourself, why is the examining team telling us all this data? Most likely, the data, the clues given in the scenario have got to be used and reflect somewhere in your answer later. So with these things in your mind, that will serve a ground for you by blending the task and the clue together in forming a virtual answer plan in your mind. So that is what I meant by plan the answer. But that is insufficient because those answers are just kept in your mind until you are able to lay out in either your words response or spreadsheet response option. So that is where the presentations of answers will come out effectively, provided the previous step will have done effectively as well. Now, looking at that perhaps gives you some of the idea and tips. In terms of narrative nature of the questions, what exactly will give a good habit? And on the contrary, what are exactly the bad habits that we should try to avoid as much as we can? Looking at the first three bullet points on the top, whenever students are to deliver or produce the narrative answer for questions that ask to things like discuss, explain, comment, evaluate. When you deal with this kind of narrative nature of the task, remember to ensure whatever point you would like to narrate, try, if possible, put in with a signpost. Signpost, in other words, heading, letting the marketing team know what exactly is the theme that you would like to articulate. Now, once you have a clear signpost and heading, you will then ensure the entire statement are fully articulated according to the verb as mentioned. Take for instance, if the question is asking students to briefly discuss, as comparing to critically discussed, you should aware the differences, even though both start with the verb discussed. One, however, is expecting a less in-depth, perhaps it is the breadth of the context that we're talking about. But when the question is referring to critically discussed, you probably have to focus on the depth of the answer. So that is exactly the kind of the articulation skills that students need to brush up and ensure applying correctly with the verbs found in the questions. And let's not forget, very likely, when you are to tackle a narrative questions, you are likely to provide more than one signpost or heading. So in between the signpost and heading, after one particular articulation, leave spacing to go into another paragraph when you start illustrating or articulating the second and the third signpost, so on and so forth. Do not cram all the answers together. If possible, one paragraph should try include one key point of articulation that represented by a heading. So that will allow you to have a consistent habit of tackling narrative questions. Now, please keep an eye on the last three bullet points given over here. Try not to do the following: using too much of jargons, waffling too much, just trying to make your answer look long isn't work. It will not work in the ACC examination. Instead, ensuring the content of the answer is of quality, ensuring every paragraph that you put it in is addressing what the question is talking about, instead of putting in lots and lots of your working experience, your thought of mind that may not be as relevant as what the question is asking. So try to avoid waffling. Another extreme answering habit that you should try to avoid is putting your answer merely in the point form layout. Students, when the question asks to discuss, comment, or explain, by merely putting a one-line length of a point for an answer, ask yourself, did you really explain? Did you really discuss? You're not. You're simply just listing out the point. Listing is totally different from explain or discussed. So that is already sending the message to the marketing team if you really understand the meaning of the verb to illustrate and apply the answer correctly according to the verbs that is found in the requirement. Same thing apply when it comes to numerical questions type. First, looking at the first three bullet points, should the questions involve calculation, which I would like to divide the calculations into two main types of calculation. For the simple calculation, example, in the context of investment appraisal by using NPV. As you may know, this is one of the very regularly found questions type in section C. It may be sometimes come with the questions, provide you with ranges of relevant items. And among those, relevant costs would be something that is commonly found in such kind of questions. At times, the questions may have provided you some of the relevant costs, direct material costs, direct labor costs, direct expenses. If, according to the data, and you found out that in the calculations of, say, for instance, direct labor costs, direct expenses, or maybe it could be variable overhead, labor costs and expenses, labor costs and variable overheads could be sometimes coming with the data whereby it is X dollar per labor hour. So we have labor rate similarly apply. If, let's say, instead of direct expenses, if the questions come with variable overhead with the overhead rate of Y dollar per labor hour, in order to save time, you do not want it to take a look at, let's take the labor rate, multiply the labor hour to work at the labor cost, and then moving on to variable overhead, looking at the overhead rate per hour multiplied with the same number of labor hour. Instead, you may want to combine the two of the rate together between the labor rate and the overhead rate so that we can get a conversion cost rate per hour to multiply with the labor hour to work out the conversion cost per unit before multiplying with the quantity. You may want to classify this as a simple calculation, but at least in the description, when you write what exactly is involved, you either can write labor cost plus variable overhead, or if you know the name or the term, you may just use the word variable conversion cost with a bracket showing it is labor cost together with the variable overhead. Then coming to the cell in the spreadsheet, you may just add on the two numbers together without the need to write the name of the rates specially. So this is what I meant by a simple calculation that perhaps with one step of the working would be good enough to show the answer, but let's not forget to label the answer clearly. If you include both the costs together, please label it clearly. Whereas, if you are dealing with a complex calculation, take for example, if at times the question is asking to estimate or to calculate weighted average cost of capital, WACC, of a company, you may have experience by practicing some of the past exam questions. You may need to apply different models of valuation or different models of estimation to derive the reading or the coefficient of KE. You probably will be using dividend valuation model, By using bond valuation model, then only you will be able to derive the KD for the bond. So with this kind of the tedious and complex calculation, try not to cram all together into one simple formula tab. Putting all the formulas together into one formula tab to derive the WACC may have given you the correct answer at the end. But ask yourself, would the marker be able to follow? If you put too many models into one line of the equation without narrating and labeling them, what exactly is happening? Worse still, what if something went wrong along the line of the formula? The end answer will be different. And if the marker couldn't understand what exactly these numbers are made up of, probably 0 is what you get. So think twice again. That is exactly what I meant by the presentation you should consider adopting when it comes to complex calculation. Again, if you deal with questions on decision making, like investment appraisal, as mentioned a moment ago, when you deal with estimates, when you deal with forecast data, whenever it comes to an unlikely cases where you are not too sure what exactly these forecast data is about, you may want to communicate to the marketing team what is in your mind. As I say again, in an unlikely situation, if you feel that it is unclear on a particular forecast data given, please take the initiative. State down your assumption. What do you assume this figure to be, if necessary? So that is how we took the initiative to improve the clarity of the communication, showing the marketing team what exactly make up our answer. Last but not least, let's not repeat and let's not carry the following bad habits as shown on the last 2 bullet points with the cross. Deriving the answer without showing the correct functionality is a no-no. This is true, especially when some students carry calculator to the examination hall or to the computer lab. And they went do the calculation on the calculator, plug the end result and insert by typing in the figure into the Excel. That is a no-no. You're wasting your time, and yet the marketing team would not have an idea, the whole of your processes to derive the figure. That is something that try to avoid. And again, do not take it for granted that the marketing team will understand everything you put down in your worksheet. Instead, have the courtesy, have the thought and considerations to show your labor clearly. So what do I mean by that? Guys, time for me to demonstrate some of the bad demonstration of answering and good demonstrations of answering skills to one of this section C question that appear in December 2024 examination. The first thing I will do if I'm the students is to glance through all the requirements in these questions by picking up the verb. So it is clearly that we are asked to calculate the cash operating cycle of this company. The first thing I come across verb that asks me to calculate something, I will ask myself, do I know the formula? If I know the formula, what information will be needed? That will allow me to have a framework in my mind. When I read and understand the story on the left-hand side, I already expect what information will be coming to me already. So when we come to those kind of data or figure, that already allow me to fit into my answer plan before I put down in my spreadsheet. So if you take a look at part B, that's another verb that asks to discuss 3 ways where the company could use it to reduce its cash operating cycle. Now, I know a lot of students tend to suffer not only the calculation, but also the narrative questions. A lot of students have no idea what are we supposed to put it in, even though we know we have to discuss 3 ways. As a general guideline to all, whenever a requirement such as these that carry and contain the name of the company, like G company, guys, make sure when you produce every single paragraph of your answer. You got to go back to the left-hand side, look at the scenario, pick up the clue, which you can see from the earlier screen until this screen. The questions gave you a lot of background story in addition to the numbers and figures. Why do you think examining team tell you so much of things? Take, for instance, sales. Apart from telling you how many % of sales are credit, apart from telling you how many % is the gross profit margin, looking at the second line and onwards, why is examining team telling us so much of things? It must be a hint that says, hey, you need to look at this clue when you want to form your idea, when you want to articulate your answer. So when I were to develop my answer to discuss 3 ways to reduce the cycle, I had to go back to this scenario, looking at the background, and craft my answer. Make sure my answer relate to this scenario, rather than the answer that straight away coming from your learning resources. Many students tend to just throw in, put in, and reproduce the answer from books. And guys, that isn't work, because the questions has mentioned the name of the company specifically. Unless there's no name mentioned, then this kind of the requirement will be quite standalone and generic. You may want to get some easy mark by putting in some answer from both in a rare occasion where name was not found in the requirement. So please bear that in mind. Now, if I were to show you the last 2 requirements where part C is asking to calculate, that's another task that comes with the computational in nature. And finally, we have the last requirement that asks for discussing the motive for the businesses to hold cash. Well, if you have glanced through all the 4 requirements in these questions, it is clearly that the questions here is asking on working capital management, particularly managing the cash with the application of Miller-Orr model. And if you look at the marked allocations, you will notice the mark is almost equally spread between the narrative and the computational time. With the due constraint on the time that we have today, I'm going to show you a poor and a good quality answer for A and B of the requirement. Now, if you take a look at part A to show the calculations of cash operating cycle, guys, do you think this is a good presentation of answer? Do you think these will impress the marketing team that, hey, marker, the cash operating cycle for G company is 73 days. Do you think the marketing team understands what have you been doing in this kind of working? Even though every numbers that you see in the spreadsheet is supported by the formula tab above, showing the marketing team how exactly this number is derived. Do you think this is a good presentation of the answer? Well, think of this again. If someone who doesn't know you, would they know what exactly is 120? Would they know exactly what is 2160? Well, I doubt so. So at the end, I don't think the marketing team will really understand where exactly the 73 days is coming from. So in conclusion, I think all of you have got the right guess. This is the poorly presented answer. So what makes an answer in the computational one that is marker friendly? Let's take a look at this. Well, instead of showing only the figure without narration and labeling, this time I'm taking my initiative to let the marketing team know I'm here to calculate the cash operating cycle of the company. Then I even took the initiative to narrate what exactly that this number representing. Inventory holding periods for each and every type of inventory, trade receivable period, trade payable periods, and then I even write down my formula. So only when the formula is in, then when the marketing team look at the 20 days, they know what exactly 120 is about. They know what 2160 is about. So that is exactly a clear communication method, letting the marketing team know, hey, this is what behind the scene of the figure. So all in with the clear communication, clear narrative labeling to the marketing team. I think this is overall a good answer. Now, obviously, you have to then spend time back home before the exam, make sure all these things are done within the allocated time, according to the marks given. Guys, coming back to the narrative type of questions, B, what exactly make up a poor answer? Let's take a look at this. Students may have given 3 answers, which are ways. It is so-called a ways to reduce the cash operating cycle. Now, on the assumption, every one of us already know the formula of cash operating cycle, take a look at the way that these students articulate. First one, we can reduce the inventory holding periods for raw material, for work in progress, for finished good. Have I answered the questions? Think of this again. Not really. I haven't actually addressed what the questions want. We know the formula that derive and determine the cash operating cycle. The way that these articulations is demonstrating is purely just narrating the formula. But what is behind the scene is totally not there. We know to reduce the cash cycle, we have to reduce the inventory holding period. But what is missing is that you haven't told the marketing team how. How are you going to reduce the inventory holding period? Same thing. How are we going to reduce the trade receivable period? It is how that matters. So therefore, these give rise to a bad and a poorly presented answer. On the contrary, take a look at the following. Take a look at how I articulate the way to improve by reducing the cash operating cycle, starting with inventory holding period. So how are we to cut down the inventory holding period, knowing that we have 3 types of inventory? So I go straight into raw material at the first place with a signpost. Guys, remember, signpost and heading. And my articulations will try to cap into 1 paragraph. And take a look at the content of my articulation. I relate and make use of the scenario. I relate to all the clues given into the background of the storyline. So that will make my answer very specifically relating to G company. Well, that is only for raw material. How about for work in progress? How about for finished good? Do you notice the style, the layout of the answer I presented is pretty consistent? I keep it into 1 paragraph. Whatever I want to say, all I found in just 1 paragraph. And do you see spacing? So when the marketing team look at this kind of answer, do they feel comfortable? Are they clear about what you're trying to highlight? Yes, obviously. So each and every paragraph will easily grant you 1 mark. You just got to hit at least 3 paragraphs. You will get 3 marks out of 6 to get a pass. That is exactly how you should set a realistic target to get you through half the marks, especially on the narrative type of the questions. Take a look at lastly, just a quick demonstration how I articulate the way to improve by reducing the receivable period and by making use of the current status of our good payment record on the payable period. So all these, if you spend time watching the playback of the video, look at the way I articulate. So I will try to make my style of articulation as consistent as possible. So this is what we meant by an effective way of presenting a narrative answer. So guys, after looking into some of the demonstrations a moment ago, now we understand what students are facing, what exactly are the issues that students are experiencing in dealing with examination, particularly not only section C, but section B and A. In general, these 6 are the commonly found challenges among many students. You may have to ask yourself, are all these challenges applied to you? Are these challenges happening on you as well? If yes, take a look at the diagram that we used. What is this diagram showing? Actually, all these challenges are interrelated. You couldn't just solve one challenge while leaving the rest unhandled. You got to solve one after the other, then at the end, all the challenges will be able to get fixed. To me, how are we to deal with, how are we to work on these challenges? The answer is lied upon the root cause that give rise to these challenges. To me, these 4 boxes in red represent 4 key categories of root cause that you're going to work on it, that you're going to make some changes on it if you want to address the challenges effectively that bring into the improvements in your marks during the exam. So what exactly are my recommendations in dealing with the 4 categories of this root cause that give rise to the key challenges? Here are the answers. Mindset, habit, knowledge, strategy, and technique. These 4 categories that give rise to the challenges are mainly because students tend to have the bad practices that represented by the gray color column on the middle. Instead, what I would recommend all the students to take a look at it is the right-hand side with positive mindset, proactive mindsets, with a good sense of priority, followed by the rest of it. So these are the kind of the recommendations I have it. So one of it, for example, the learning methods that we apply for knowledge enhancement for FM should base upon logical learning, should base upon understanding rather than rote learning and memorizing stuff like that. So these are the things which you may want to consider spending some time to look into that for a way to improve your exam performance by getting more marks in exam. So guys, before we leave the time to all the live Q&A to the chat box or the Q&A box, these are some of the questions that we have gathered from the previous round of the session. Now, let's take a look at whether these questions come across your mind, guys. Students may have asked, in the calculations of net present value, we all know there are more than one ways to derive the net present value in exam. If I use NPV formula, the formula that refers to equal NPV bracket, then you drag the cash flow and comma coming with the discount rate, close bracket. That is the formula that the students is referring to. And what if this answer turned out to be different from the one that derived manually by referring to the discount factor table? Will that answer using the NPV formula be acceptable? What do you think? The answer is absolutely acceptable. As long as the approach that you were using to derive the NPV is the correct one and clearly indicating to the marketing team the approach you're using. With a slight rounding error, that is perfectly fine. In other words, it is the process that matters. It is the process of deriving the answer that is what earns you most of the marks, not the end result. Keep that in your mind. Let's take a look at the second frequently asked questions by another student. If the questions ask us to critically explain something, so in other words, if the question asks, explain something, explain the applications of dividend valuation model in a company, explain the applications of capital asset pricing model in deriving the cost of equity of this company. Does it mean we need to challenge the validity? Does it mean we have to criticize the limitation on the model? The answer is no. Explain is a verb that is not equal to criticized. Explain followed by the whole sentence will then determine what you have to articulate. But definitely, it is not something that when you see the word explain critically, you must talk about the negative or the downside of it. Remember, that is not the same thing. So again, it depends what exactly the questions are. If I were to pick the one that I mentioned just now, critically explain the application of dividend valuation model for this company. So if the dividend valuation model were used in deriving the share price, you just have to talk about what are the underlying assumptions on the model in use. Are we assuming the dividends remain constant in the future? Are we assuming the dividends is constantly growth in the future until perpetuity? These are the things that you are explaining or you are discussing, not necessarily criticizing what is not right. Let's take a look at the third frequently asked questions. Do we use pre-tax or post-tax cost of finance when calculating net present value? I suppose everyone should be aware in the calculations of net present value, the appropriate discount rate in use should be the weighted average cost of capital, which made up of primarily cost of equity and cost of debt. The cost of finance that asked by these students obviously refer to cost of debt. What is the answer? Should we use the pre-tax or post-tax cost of debt in the calculations of WACC that serve to be the discount rate for deriving the NPV? And the answer is post-tax. If you refer to the formula of WACC, the KD will come with a factor that to multiply with 1 minus tax rate that already indicate from the company's viewpoint the cost of that we consider should also include the effect of the tax saving on the interest that we paid for the borrowing. So therefore, that would based on post-tax cost of debt in the calculations of WACC for deriving net present value. How about the fourth one? For business valuations questions, should we use before tax cost of debt? If you are aware where exactly the syllabus of the questions relate to, the valuations questions in this FAQ is mainly referring to valuations of bonds, valuation of loan notes by using the bond valuation or the discounted cash flow model. And the cost of debts that referred by these students is obviously the discount rate that we use it to discount the future cash benefit for the bondholder, for the loan note holder into the present value. Adding all the present value together would then represent the market value of the loan notes. I already said a moment ago, when we understand the rationale of this valuation model, we are trying to discount all the future cash benefit for the investor into the present value. When the investor collect the interest from the loan note issuer, they collect the interest in gross. They do not consider the tax saving effect at all. Hence, to answer these questions, if you know the logic behind, and the answer should be yes, we use before tax cost of debt, because the valuation model in use to derive the value of the loan notes are usually stemming from the viewpoint of investor. An investor do not need to consider the tax saving effect at all. That is the rationale behind. Finally, here comes the last FAQ before we look at the live Q&A. Sir, you say that we should assume working capital is reimbursed at the end of the life. Clearly, this is the questions pertaining to the calculations of net present value of a project, where the project requires investment in the working capital at the beginning of the project life. But coming to the end of the project life, what if the questions says this project is lasting to perpetuity, and the question did not mention, which I'm telling you, it is unlikely. It is unlikely that the questions will leave it not mentioned. Should the questions, in case, really remain unclear about what should we do on the recovery on the working capital, you may allow to state your assumption. And in this case, either assumptions you put, whether a recovery of working capital is assumed at the end of whatever year, which is year 4 or year 5, or you assume there is no recovery of the working capital, either way is fine. But if you were to ask me, should the project is lasting to infinite or perpetuity, when will you expect a recovery of working capital? That would give yourself unnecessary hassle. I would therefore assume a non-recovery of working capital in this kind of situation. But again, I would like to highlight this is under an unlikely situation, because most exam questions will indicate the status of the recovery of working capital. Well, I think that would be good enough to show everyone here with some of the commonly asked questions. Now, time for me to take a look at your live Q&A boxes over here. Now, let's take a look at the first questions in the live Q&A. Now, one of the students is asking, if the IRR calculated through the Excel and the manual way seems to be different, what should you do? Once again, you either will make use of the functionality to derive the IRR, or you could go through the manual way to derive the IRR. You will just stick to one of it. I know a lot of students tend to spend time. On one hand, they use a manual way to derive the IRR. On the other hand, they try to counter-check. They try to confirm if the answer is correct by using the functionality in the Excel. My suggestions to you, do not waste your time to do double work. If you have no trust on the manual approach, don't do the manual approach. Just use the functionality. Why would you like to do cross-checking and double-check and wasting time? The moment you apply manual approach, as long as you go through the calculation by showing the step clearly, trust me, just stick to it. Do not even waste a single time to do another round of IRR with the functionality. The moment you use the functionality, at the first place, you shouldn't have started with the manual one anymore. That is my answer. So again, it is the same ground like what I commented on the NPV. Even with a slight differences, that is perfectly fine. As long as both the way, especially the manual way of deriving IRR, are correctly applied. So I hope that answers your questions. Stick to one way. The way will allow you to get the figure, and that's all. Do not spend time to do double check. There is no need for that. Now, here comes another question. I have a problem with the questions about recommend that nearest number or nearest thousand. How do I get it correct? I suppose this question is pertaining to multiple choice questions, either in section A or section B, where there is a fill in the blank questions that you have to insert the number according to the nearest number. And guys, please follow instruction. The rounding instructions are usually referred to the final figure. The rounding instructions does not start from the first. You go all the way down until you get the final figure, follow the rounding instructions and insert the figure into the cell provided. Should the rounding instructions say round us to the nearest number of units, you just make sure your end figure is a rounded figure. Do not show 10.3 units. Instead, you just show 10 units. If the question say nearest thousand, make sure your last three decimal, your last three digit is 000 in your answer. That's called nearest thousands. Okay? Now, here comes the next ones. How to input IRR formula in the spreadsheet. These questions may also want to extend into how to input NPV formula in the spreadsheet. How to input square root formula in the spreadsheet. How to enter square formula in the spreadsheet. There are many similar questions like this. And guys, please go to the practice platform, referring to any of the past exam paper. Look at the bottom left. Click on help/formula. Once you open up that bottom left box, you could see there are 3 tabs. Take a look at the guidance on all the functionality that you can find easily to be used in the Excel response option. Your answer, it's found in that formula sheet. If you do not know what I'm talking about, after this webinar, turn on to any past exam questions on the practice platform, bottom left. Click on that, read yourself, you will know what I'm talking about. Now, the next questions I have, how do you show square root and power in the calculation? See, everything I mentioned here are found as a solution in the guidance of the formula sheet. So you will be able to solve so many questions in your mind if you know how to fully utilize all the clues that found along the screen in your practice platform. Next, we don't need to write formulas, right? Should we get marks if the calculations become wrong? Well, that goes back to the principle. If, imagine, I do not write the formula, instead I go straight and dump in the number in the calculations with the functionality. What if the figure goes wrong? How would the marker know? What figure are you referring to? The marker would therefore treat that figure as a wrong figure. You would have lost the mark. But if you write the formula, at least you can still tell the marking team, I know the way to derive the figure. I know this is the right way. The marking team will still consider your knowledge when you show the formula correctly. But if you ask me personally, writing formula is not so much for the marker to see. Writing formula is more for you to follow. Trust me, including me. When I deal with complex calculation, I do not write formula at the first place. I go straight to plug in the figure with the formula in my mind. I'm doing it at a high risk. And that is not recommended, particularly you are in the rush. The more rush you are, the more you have to put the formula down. Make sure you do not make careless mistake. Trust me, it is worth the time to put the formula, ensuring the accuracy of your working. Because when you come back, if you have time to check, well, what do you want to check? If there's no formula, you will like to, and you are very likely to repeat the whole calculations again. That will make your cross-checking less effective, less productive. That is not a good plan at all. Okay? Well, here comes the next questions. Maybe I will take the last questions due to time constraints, yeah? Some of you asked about section A question. Should we work with exact value or round only at the end of the rounding? Not to worry. As long as any multiple choice questions in both calculation and each answer involve rounding, the questions follow rounding instructions specifically. Okay, now maybe I will just take the last questions over here. I would like to take something which could be different. Okay, so I have this. Is investment appraisal, when we calculate NPV or IRR in Excel using the whole amount, In the study hub, it is calculated using thousands of dollars and discount factor to 3 decimal. No worries, no worries. Do not worry about rounding. Do not worry about the decimal. As long as you demonstrate the concept and the step of calculations correctly, you are safeguarded. But what is important is, if you would like to show all the calculations in 1,000, make sure you indicate the 1,000 signage at the top. When you want to show the discount factor up to 3 decimal, just show it to 3 decimal. That is fine. That is perfectly fine. In fact, the reason why discount factor are normally go up to 3 decimal is because if you go to the bottom left again, look at the formula sheet on the discount factor or the cumulative discount factor. The decimals for all the factors are up to 3 decimals. So that is the reason why study hub's answers are all up to 3 decimal. But if you want to use more than 3 decimal, by all means, go ahead, no issue. In fact, you should not spend your time to purposely adjust your decimal on the functionality in a spreadsheet. It is not worth it. Just let it be. Focus on the flow, get done as much as you can. Well, I suppose this is all the time that we have got today. I hope I have answered as many questions as I could over here. So maybe I will pass the rest of the time to Kritika. Over to you, Kritika.
Thank you so much, Zee. That has been an incredibly informative session and lots of questions that you've answered, particularly around students being nervous about rounding and calculations. And I just want to pick up on something a student has sort of mentioned in terms of, if I make an error and then I continue with that number, will I get the mark? And Zee, as you've kind of alluded to, there are follow-through marks and own figure rule marks available. So as long as you show the calculations, like Zee was saying, you'll be fine. So can I get some hearts and thumbs ups for Zee? Because it's been absolutely amazing. I can see some of the reactions coming through already. So keep those coming for all the incredible knowledge that Zee has imparted here for you guys to use in the exam. Now, before I wrap up and before you all rush off, I just want to ask you a very quick question. So what you should be seeing on your slide, on the slide right now, is a poll question that I'd like you guys to partake in. So the question here is, you know, what are the dates for the pre-June 2025 mocks and the debrief dates? And I'm loving all the emojis coming through. Fantastic. We've got celebrations coming through as well. Amazing. But whilst you're doing that, if you could also click on this slide directly, what are the dates for the pre-June mocks and the debriefs? And I'm waiting for a few more responses to come through to have a little think about the dates there. Zee, I hope you're loving this. Loads of hearts we're seeing coming through right now as well, which is great. That's been fantastic. Okay, we'll give it another sort of 10 seconds to get more of us to click on the slide directly rather than sending us messages through chat or the inbox. So just click on the option on the slides. Okay. Fantastic. I think close to half of us giving us the responses. Oh, some more coming through. Fantastic. So I'm going to click next and actually reveal what the dates are. The correct answer is the 9th of May for the release of the mocks. And actually 40% of you, including 9.4%, you did pick May. The debriefs are being released later. I really hope that, you know, on this call, those that have selected that date have actually gone in and attempted it. And if you haven't, you've still got time. Please, please do go in and attempt those mocks. And we've got debrief videos that will walk you through the sort of answers to the questions in that mock, and these have been, or these are going to be made available from the 16th of May. So the correct answer there was option C, or the third option that you see on the slides there. Now these videos, these debrief videos, are going to be on the ACCA Student Study Resources YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, please do go ahead, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell, because you'll get notified the minute those videos are going to go live. Now, just to sort of wrap up, a reminder that these pre-exam mocks can be accessed through the ACCA practice platform. And I remember seeing a question earlier in the Q&A where, you were sort of asking, are the questions in the study hub sufficient? Should I be using anything else? Actually, to that, I would say use the practice platform for full exam standard question practice, and the pre-exam mocks, absolutely brilliant for that. Okay, think of it this way: you're not going to be booking your driving test without sitting in a car first. Doing a mock is akin to that. So get yourself acquainted with the software, the interface that you will experience on the exam day. Now, doing a mock is great, but as we've reiterated through this webinar, make sure you debrief those questions. And like we said, those will be available from the 16th. And if you need to brush up on technical content, you've got the study hub as well that you can access. All the information that we've shared today is available within the resources. So I'm just going to very quickly spotlight that, make it front and center. Do click on those resources and make sure you explore those. Finally, all that's left for me to say is a big thank you to Z, absolutely fantastic. A big thank you to all of you for joining us on this webinar and the team behind the scene that have supported your questions as you've been sending them through. And from me, the very best of luck for your exam. You've got this.
Thank you. Good luck to all.